Asystent zdrowienia w kontakcie z osobą, która doświadcza kryzysu czy też zaburzenia, powinien przede wszystkim kierować się własną intuicją, która wypływa właśnie z wewnętrznego paradygmatu własnych doświadczeń. Czyli to nie jest tak, że asystent zdrowienia ma taką możliwość powiedzieć, mi to pomogło to i to i to i tak powinieneś iść. Nie, wręcz przeciwnie. Powinien posłuchać samego siebie, że to jest zupełnie inny człowiek, czegoś innego doświadczyć, dać mu czas i moment, żeby sam określił, czego potrzebuje, taką cierpliwość wewnętrzną. Są różne techniki, od rysowania, po poezję, po nawet sport, po wiarę. Są różne możliwości odnalezienia samego siebie.
Dzień dobry. Chciałem lub dobry wieczór, w zależności od szerokości geograficznej. Chciałem serdecznie przywitać Państwa na pierwszym seminarium seminarium Siła Empowerment, Siła Wzajemności. Chciałem serdecznie podziękować wszystkim wolontariuszom, którzy brali udział w tworzeniu naszego spotkania. Prelegentom, którzy pozwalają nam zobaczyć nowe możliwości. Również zaszczycili nas swoją obecnością, by przekazać swoją wiedzę. Jakby większość osób, mam nadzieję, mnie kojarzy z działaniem jako Mateusz Wiernat. Teraz skupiamy swoją siłę jako Fundacja Człowiek. Dzięki również wsparciu Europy, trochę między innymi i Komisji Europejskiej. Dzięki Biurze do Spraw Osób Niepełnosprawnych UP oraz portalowi Piękny Umysł. Tak, teraz chcę przemówić do wszystkich, żeby zrozumieli, że staramy się również stworzyć pierwsze niezależne działania głos, który pokaże, w którym kierunku należy zmierzać. Chyba mimo lęków i obaw poczuć własną siłę z tej słabości. Czas najwyższy działać razem, obojętnie jakie organizacje nas skupiają, w jakimkolwiek kontekście się znajdujemy. My jako osoby doświadczenia. Łączy nas wspólna wiedza płynąca z doświadczenia kryzysu. I oparcie się na leczeniu zaburzeń psychicznych jako jednym. Chcemy pokazać, że można wierzyć i można dawać nadzieję innym. Ponieważ trudny czas dopiero przed nami. Nasza fundacja w obecnym momencie buduje mapę wsparcia. Gdzie będziemy chcieli ukazać wszelkie możliwe działania w zakresie wsparcia człowieka w kryzysie psychicznym. Od alternatywnych form do tradycyjnych. Bo jest w nas płomień, który tworzy. Który pokazuje nadzieję i możliwość. Poczucia godności. Dzisiejsi prelegenci, które miałem zaszczyt zaprosić, są pewnymi orędownikami wspólnej wartości, jaką jest wzajemność. Pozwolę sobie czytać w kolejności osób, które będą występować. Dziękuję Ci, Daniel, za przybycie i za wsparcie. Dziękuję, Werner, za przyjście i wsparcie. I dziękuję bardzo Jolini za przybycie i wsparcie. Mam nadzieję, że jako osoby z doświadczeniem umiemy się porozumieć powyżej pewnych interesów, a w interesie każdego z nas. Dlatego też najwyższy czas nie czekać, a więc działać. Po prelegentach będzie 10 minut przerwy, a następnie mam nadzieję, po to, żeby maksymalnie wykorzystać ten czas na wspólną dyskusję i wspólne punkty, które mam nadzieję będziemy realizować w przyszłości. Dlatego też serdecznie zapraszam do zaczytania swoim głosem doktora Daniela Fischera, który nauczył mnie jednego, najważniejszego w mojej pracy zawodowej, że głos bierze się oddolnie. kreuje się w ogniu, w trudnościach, w tym momencie, kiedy wzrastamy. Dlatego tak bardzo ważne jest wsparcie na samym początku. Dziękuję bardzo i Daniel, zapraszam.
Thank you. Well, it's a pleasure to be here to speak with you all.
Prawdziwa
Poland.
przyjemność być tutaj i mówić do Was.
And the main message I'd like to get across is that the more you can develop your voice, the more you can make changes in your mental health system. I will also go over the importance of belief and understanding that people can and do recover from mental health issues. So I'll begin by giving you a brief overview of my own recovery, and then describe a little bit of the movement that we've developed in the United States. I originally was a biochemist. I have a PhD in biochemistry, and I was a firm believer that our emotional problems were caused by chemical imbalances. So I went to the laboratory, the National Institute of Mental Health, and in the United States, our premier research institute, and studied the synthesis of neurotransmitters, dopamine, serotonin. I carefully weighed and measured each chemical. I can hardly believe that's what I thought, that people's dreams and hopes and love and everything was determined by chemistry. And I had disappointment in my personal life. My marriage did not survive, and I lost faith in this idea that chemistry would be the answer to happiness. I also gone to the laboratory to try to solve my sister's mental health issues, and so I felt I was letting her down. I was disappointing her. And I literally felt and I didn't make it as a conscious decision. I literally stopped. I stopped all activities that I had control over. I stopped talking. I stopped walking, moving. I stopped eating. The condition is called catatonia, but what I would call it was I had to stop and reconsider my life. And I literally saw a stop sign and I said to myself, I have to stop and not continue the way that I'm living, because it's only leading to heartache and distress. And I knew at some level I was not living. And I think all of us carry inside a mute being, maybe like our spirit, maybe like our soul. This being inside it really is sort of our guidance, our sense of self. It's really where our motivation comes from. It's what's uniquely our own. And I had not been paying attention to that mute being inside. I'd been always paying attention to what other people told me I should be doing. So my thoughts were not my own. My decisions were not my own. I didn't believe in myself. I didn't believe in my own power. I only believed what other people told me. And I was very good at doing what other people told me to do. But I had no idea of where my heart was and what I wanted to do. And I was like a machine. I was like a robot. Go to work, go to work, go to work, go to work. Get a Nobel Prize. Make great discovery. So that failed. That failed me. And so I literally, as I say, I saw a stop sign and I went, "Ah, that's it. I have to stop." And my family didn't know what to do. So there were no alternatives to psychiatric hospitals. They took me to see a psychiatrist. He said he's crazy. He's psychotic. He has to be in a psychiatric hospital. So I was hospitalized. They gave me medicine. I came back to ordinary reality, but I still knew there was something deeply wrong inside. And a year later, it recurred. I had tried marijuana. I thought, well, maybe that'll solve my problems. No, just made matters worse. So this time, the second time, I was mute. I did not speak for 5 weeks. 5 weeks. I just can't get over it. 5 weeks I did not speak. And all that time, I was watching for signs of human life. And I was saying to myself, I'm not coming out of here. I'm not going to return to the world of the living until I know that there are human beings out there that care. I know there are human beings out there that have a heart and can show that they have a heart. And thank heavens, in the hospital, it was a Navy hospital because I was in the public health service. But thank heavens, there were some young men, probably 18, 19 years old, who they didn't have very much clinical training, but they had big hearts. They had very big hearts, and they communicated by their expression, by their gestures, by their caring, and they encouraged me to come back, come back, come back. Maybe it was time to eat. Then, you want to eat? Is it time to go to bed? Maybe sleep. Just universal gestures, but mostly the gestures of love, the gestures of caring, the gestures of their heart. I owe my life to them. I really owe my life to them. And I kept thinking, if someone else had been here where I am, they'd know how to be with me. They'd know not to ask questions. They'd know just to sit beside me, as those young men instinctively knew to do. So I guess when one day I was allowed to go to my laboratory, which is just across the street. Ironically, I spent 6 months in that psychiatric hospital looking through the window at my laboratory building and thinking, what was I doing there? What was I thinking there? But when I had a pass and I went to my lab, I was very joyous to see my lab mates. I hadn't really seen anybody because the first month they didn't even allow visitors to come and see me. So I was overjoyed to see at least the familiar faces. And when I came back to the hospital, they asked me how I was feeling. And I said, well, on a scale of 1 to 10, I feel 11. It's a big mistake to be too happy in a psychiatric hospital. That's interpreted as maybe a sign of overexcitement, maybe of mania. So they sent me to seclusion, and which, when you're already feeling kind of desperate, makes you feel often even worse. I really think the practice should be ended, seclusion and restraint. And they forcibly medicated me and give an injection. That also I find is really terrible practice. And all I could think of just before I blacked out was, if I get out of this hospital, I'm going to become a psychiatrist. I'm going to end these really oppressive practices. And I blacked out. Luckily, I remembered what I had vowed to myself. And I gradually worked my way out of the hospital by not saying that I was too excited or too happy or too sad or too anything, just get out of the hospital. And I saw my psychiatrist, and I had a marvelous psychiatrist. I was very, very lucky. He was from the Ukraine, I believe. And I think that may be part of my fondness for Poland and Polish people, may be related to my psychiatrist. He had been an immigrant at age 12 to the United States. And prior to that, during World War II, he'd spent with his family 8 or 9 years wandering all through Europe. And when he came to this country, he quite miraculously went through medical school, became a psychiatrist, and he was not many years older than me, George. And he was just the most marvelous human being, very, very good-hearted and very hopeful. He believed in me. And it's very important in recovery to find people that believe in you. And when I said to him, I got out of the hospital, I said, and I had in my hand the diagnosis of schizophrenia. I said to him, I'm going to become a psychiatrist, and I'm going to open these psychiatric hospitals, and people are going to get help in the community and not have to go to psychiatric hospitals. And he smiled and he said, I'll be at your graduation. I'll be at your medical school graduation. He didn't say, there, don't have fantasies that are impossible, or, why don't you go wash dishes for a while and then maybe you can go to medical school. He really believed in me. He really did. And so I went to medical school. I had one more episode of which I would call, in a way, a return to my place of trauma, because I realized, I found out later, really, that a lot of what was interfering with my capacity to feel was childhood trauma, that I had been abused by a teacher when I was 10 years old. I'd been sexually abused, and that had been suppressed, and that really, it caused me to be afraid of people and afraid of my feelings, afraid of involvement, afraid of showing who I really was. So I had a lot of therapy, group, individual. I wish I'd had family therapy. And then I went and became a psychiatrist, which wasn't easy because I didn't want to lock anybody up, but I was forced to do that. I didn't want to give anybody forced medication, but I was forced to do that at times. And I didn't tell them that just 2 years prior to my going into my psychiatric residency, I too had been hospitalized. I too had been labeled with schizophrenia. I didn't tell them that. So there's a continuing stigma and discrimination against people who've been labeled, but it's lessening a bit now. People can even be hired as peers, people with lived experience. But in the 70s, no, you didn't breathe a word of it. what sustained me during my psychiatric residency was advocacy to speak in behalf of people who were still locked up. And so I wanted to join an early advocacy group in the 70s called the Mental Patient Liberation Front, very progressive group. But because I was in training as a psychiatrist, I could only be a friend of the group. I couldn't be a card-carrying member of the group. And it was, but people knew that I was in that group, and they, people who were advocates, some of them were hospitalized at times when I was the doctor on the unit. And they come up and they whisper to me, "We know who you are. We know who you are, and we support who you are." So I was sort of like in between two worlds. I was neither fish nor fowl. And in fact, I had a dream during my residency that that I was sought after by fishermen, that they wanted me to help them fish. And I asked them why. I'm not really a good fisherman. My name is Fisher, but I'm not a fisherman. And they said, "Oh, just look at yourself." And I looked down at myself, and I was half human and half fish. I was like a merman. And they said, "See, you can go out and you can get the fish to come swim into us." And I sometimes worry and continue to worry that peers, people with lived experience, are hired to bring people who are in distress into the system, and a system that still needs a lot of work. So I struggled through my residency. I somehow managed, and I practiced as a psychiatrist for many years. We're always practicing, and I've been giving individual therapy and family therapy. I use an approach called open dialogue in family therapy. The love of my work life at this point is the development of a new practice called emotional CPR. So I want to finish with the discussion of emotional CPR. Because people often ask me, "Jay, you were diagnosed with schizophrenia and then you became a psychiatrist, and you're married, you have 2 children." I have 2 wonderful daughters. One lives actually in Berlin. And but they said, "Well, how did this happen? How did you do it?" And honestly, a lot of it was just feeling my way along. No one really had much guidance at that point. It wasn't really believed that people could recover from schizophrenia. Now there is an understanding that many more people recover. We just don't announce it. I'm kind of unusual because I continue to say that, yeah, that happened to me. It's not popular to do that. You recover, go into society, forget about it. Don't talk about it anymore. But I sort of feel like it's important in my advocacy to remind people that that people can be diagnosed and actually fit the criteria. People sometimes say I must not have really been schizophrenic, because how could I have recovered? How could I give a talk? How could I write? Start a center? I started a center called the National Empowerment Center. How could I do these things and still have been a person with schizophrenia? So I just say to them, well, people recover. Simple as that. But it's not simple how people do it. And so I and a group starting about 12 years ago of people initially in the United States, advocates, have been meeting, and as part of our advocacy is to develop this emotional CPR as an alternative way to reach people, because a lot of cases, a lot of situations, therapy doesn't work so well, especially if people are in really severe conditions. And also, recovery depends on the actions of everyone that you're in contact with. It's not just the support of a therapist or support of a psychiatrist, the support of everyone in your society. Everyone can play a positive role. Your your family, your employer, if you're in a religion, it could be in church. Every interaction can either enhance your recovery of a life or can, if they're traumatic, they can degrade your recovery. So we get sort of a catchy of describing emotional CPR is really a way to heal, helps the healing from trauma. And the three fundamental elements of trauma are disconnection of yourself from other people and disempowering your sense of efficacy, your sense of voice, your autonomy, and because it decreases your spoken sort of self-advocacy. And the third element is a cutting off of your thoughts from your feelings. So it's very hard when you're suffering trauma, effects of trauma, to know how you're feeling. So emotional CPR, we begin with connecting, especially at an emotional level. That's the C. And then we encourage people to express themselves, especially their emotional voice, and that's the empowering aspect. And when people connect with other people at an emotional level, especially feelings first, and are able to express themselves, then you start to feel more alive. You start to feel your feelings. You start to be present. And that's really very healing. And so we've sort of distilled what we've done into what we call 7 intentions. And I'll give you just a brief overview of these 7 intentions. The first thing is that when you're with somebody that's in distress, is to be as fully present as possible. So it's very important that you are present with yourself so you can be present with another person. And we say be present with your eyes and your ears and your heart, which interestingly, the Chinese symbol for listen, ting, is depicts the ears, the eyes, and the heart. So the Chinese have had an understanding of this for thousands of years. And I think it's intrinsic in human experience to know when someone's in distress, to try to be with them, try to, as fully as possible, be with them. And that means allowing yourself to, second intention, allow yourself to feel the feelings that you have when you're with them. And not immediately express what they are, but it's very important to be authentic, not to look like you're analyzing somebody or trying to figure them out or trying to solve them or label them or fix them. No, try to be with them, be present with them. So we say, be, don't do. Just try to be. And it's very hard. You'll find yourself wanting to fix the other person or wanting to breathe or you should go for a walk or do something when somebody's very anxious or, they're very angry or, they're there, calm down. Very, very problematic to do that. People usually get quite angry when you either tell them what's going to make them feel better or you tell them to calm down. Natural, but you have to sit with your own feelings, your own distress, and then maybe share a little. I'll give you a quick example. Recently in a real play, we call them real plays. So we do 12 hours, 3 4-hour segments. And we do these trainings online now. Emotional CPR, we actually were able to switch it to online. I never thought we could do that. But in the last, during this pandemic, where everyone's feeling very isolated, there's a special need to connect, more of a need to connect than ever on a social level. And we talk about social distancing, that's a big mistake. We should say people are physically distant, but not socially distant. So we really emphasize the emotional dimension of being with people, and it can even occur online. So there was one person assisting another, and the one woman who was in distress was sharing her distress, and we call them real plays. People really share the distress that they're having. And the woman said that she was having a lot of emotions, but she didn't know what they were. She couldn't really feel them. And the person assisting said that she could feel a squeezing sensation in her chest as she was assisting. And that enabled the person in distress to realize she was kind of frightened. She felt frozen a bit and didn't feel in control of her life. And the woman assisting said, "I'm actually shivering. I'm actually feeling like shivering." And the person in distress said, "Oh, shivering. Yes, that's what I'm going through." And was able then to actually take the shivering and turn it into energy because of awareness. So if you're with somebody and you're assisting them, try to be authentic, try to be yourself, try to share at least some of the feelings that you're experiencing. It's not what people are taught in counseling. This is very hard for clinicians to learn. Clinicians go, "Oh, boundaries, boundaries, boundaries. We're not supposed to share what we're feeling." We're not saying share your whole life story. Just share, "Oh, I'm feeling a little heaviness in my chest at this point," or that makes me a little sad. So I think we had a training recently in Polish, and the plan is to each month have another emotional CPR training in Polish, and we're training people in Poland, people lived experience, people who are supportive, to be trainers themselves in Poland, so that it'll be self-sustaining. And thank you very much.
Informacje. Chciałem serdecznie raz podziękować Danielowi za jego doświadczenie i też taką wiarę i nadzieję, że w Polsce możemy stworzyć tego typu działanie, mimo braku finansowania. Też również wiem, jak ważny jest własny głos i jak ciężko się go odzyskuje po tylu latach, kiedy człowiek cierpiał, nikt go nie słyszał, a był lekowany. Prosiłbym teraz o kilka słów Wernera, mojego drugiego nauczyciela, który wskazał mi, jak być cierpliwym, jak patrzeć na człowieka i jak tolerować własną niepewność w stosunku do zjawiska, które widzę, obojętnie jak je definiujemy, a jak mocno ktoś cierpi.
I can't. Okay, so it's not so easy. I'm kind of moved by your story, Daniel, and I am kind of surprised that in the end we come to such similar conclusions. And even though we had very different ways to get there, it still turned out that in the end it crumbles down to some very, very basic human things we need. Yes, and so yes, I wanted to say this. It's kind of a brotherly feeling in this to know, well, caring for these things. Well, we all find we find similar ways how to connect to other people. Yes, and well. My story is also one of a searcher, and for me, well, the search started kind of early, and I will start just with my professional ways. I tried all kinds of things, and I started my career in a law school and finished law school, and after that I became a gardener, and then I traveled around the world, and I came back and became a nurse. And this is one of the very important experiences of all my life, because at that time, being on the lowest hierarchical level in the hospital, I saw things that that somehow grew in me over the years more and more. And there was a special situation when I was sitting on the bedside by a patient who was fixed there, and he was talking, and then a young doctor came and started to interpret in a way that I, as a young man sitting by the side, I thought, my God, how can he talk like this to a person in a state like this? And it made me so angry that this was the moment when I decided to say, well, I know I can do better. I want to go into medicine and maybe become a psychiatrist or something. And that's what I did. And this angriness, I must say, this angriness about the discontent of things that happened in hospitals stayed with me for a long, long, long time. And I think it's one of the powers that drove me to find something that would meet my needs and the needs of other people even more. But this was also a long, long journey for me to get there. And well, I climbed the ladder of career up step by step, and I was lucky in the end to meet some people who talked about things that became more and more important to me. And I had some teachers who would talk a lot about anthropological or humanistic aspects of being a human. But looking back, I thought, it's not just enough to get interested in these things, and it's not just enough to talk about these, but you also have to find a way to set this into work, to do something more about it. And well, our kind of system is also a very stable one, and I had to cope with many aspects of it. And I must say, I learned also a lot. And even though I had to come over many things in the run of the years, I still think it's precious knowledge. I know for myself, I know how things feel. And I also had to do a lot of things in the career, which in the later run I feel ashamed of that I did it. But by now I know, well, I didn't know better, and there is a power in the system that it's so hard to resist if you want to stay within the system. And there's also some colleagues you like to work with, and you have same thoughts, but you still have to deal with the reality as it is. But in all the years looking back, I thought I collected valuable knowledge, I collected valuable experience that helped me in the end to have the courage to start something nobody else would do at the time. And well, when I was about 45 or something, when I became a director of a psychiatric hospital close to Berlin. And at that time, my discontent was still a large one, and I was looking for solutions. And at that time, I came across the Finnish people or the Scandinavian people who were working in this international network for the treatment of psychosis. And these people became part of my network, and they became kind of a home for me. It's kind of a home for my thoughts, and I could talk about things I could not talk at home to my colleagues, because the languages were very different. And they encouraged me to introduce something into our hospital that's called open dialogue. And open dialogue is, something that came to Poland also since 2013. I think it was the first steps or the first seminars I started at that time. And I had the chance, the once in a lifetime chance, to introduce and educate all our staff for how to do open dialogue, or how to what can we do with open dialogue in our hospital. And this were, for me, these were the 7 best years of my professional life, and I learned a lot, and I got my experiences, and this made me strong enough to say, in the end, this is something I want to get more people to know. And then my teaching career started. I must also say that we were not successful in the end in our hospital as to work after the principles of open dialogue in a hospital would mean that you close the wards and you work mainly only without patient facilities. And we were talking with in Poland it's the NFZ, and we have the insurance companies who would have their deals with us, but they did not agree to a financing of the open dialogue approach in our catchment area. And that so this was a slashback for me, and it was very disappointing. But there had been another lesson to learn, that you might have good ideas, but they might not be able to set into practice everywhere. And so I developed more an idea, okay, if it's not possible here, maybe it's possible in another place. Yeah, so this is my story, and I'm mostly teaching staff from organizations or hospitals, and because somehow I think there's many people who are looking for a different way to do something. And we're all educated in a way to feel us as the experts, to tell other people what we know, what we think would be good for them. And this is hard to give up for every professional, as long as you are working in the system. But well, I know these people, and I know they are also looking for different ways, and so I thought, well, this is the field I know. I know about their circumstances. I know about the difficulties. So why shouldn't I support them to find better ways? A big part of this development of all the thoughts we had is due to what has been developed with the ideas together with empowerment. That we should support people to be masters of their own life and not create a new dependency. The other thing is, if we what happened in the recovery movement, even though I had my problems with the in the recovery, because one of my basic assumptions is that all life is a development, and you can never be the same again. You cannot be the one you were, but you can always only become someone. So, but this is maybe something I have been thinking more about, and I were lucky also to meet a lot of people with lived experience from whom I learned the most in the last years of my career, when I started to listen more to them. And to be aware that there's no reason to give up hope in any situations. There's no reason to give up hope. But we also have to learn to stay humble and patient. And the third thing that has become one of core part of my philosophy is the philosophy about connection.
Jeszcze nie. Jeszcze nie. Mhm.
And open dialogue includes or is working in a similar way what Daniel talked about, what ECPR is about. And maybe it's a little bit of a different approach. That we have this thinking that it's important to think of the network from the beginning. And thinking about the network from the beginning is just another perspective to connect to people in a way to support them. And I also think that it's part of human wisdom that we, in moments of trouble and danger, we need other people to support us. Because in moments of crisis, when we lose trust, when we lose faith, we lose hope, we lose this feeling of safety, or we lose this feeling of belonging somewhere. This is something to restore. This I see as our main task as helpers, to try to restore this so that everyone can make decisions for himself again. And I think Daniel explained this in his speech in a good way, so I don't have to repeat this. It's just one point I want to stress also, that the importance of being present. If another person is in need, the importance of being present is something it took me time to discover this, how important this really is. And how difficult it sometimes is to live this. And maybe I close with a line I read somewhere in Facebook or somewhere, I don't know, but the line goes, the healing begins when you feel you are listened to. Thank you for listening.
Chciałem serdecznie podziękować jeszcze Wernerowi za te słowa, szczególnie słowa o rozwoju i o cierpieniu wypływającym z rozwoju, o różnej interpretacji tego cierpienia w trudnych warunkach, kiedy człowiek rzeczywiście zamyka się i ten krzyk zostaje w nim. I ten gniew nieraz wyzwala rzeczywiście tą potrzebę dzielenia się własnym głosem. Ja może powiem anegdotkę, jak poznałem Jolene. Byłem rok temu w Brukseli. Miałem przyjemność dokonać odczytu 10 grudnia. To jest Dzień Praw Człowieka. Wszedłem do Parlamentu Europejskiego całkowicie przestraszony, zalękniony. I nagle zobaczyłem pióropusz, tęczę. I wiedziałem, że już jest ktoś i że już nie jestem sam. Pewne rzeczy widać od razu. Po prostu się je czuje. Jestem niezwykle zaszczycony, że Jolene przyjęła nasze zaproszenie po to, żeby też pokazać, jak z gniewu, ze złości, z przykrości tworzyć przestrzeń do nadziei, zdrowienia i rozwoju. Czy mógł prosić o Jolene o zabranie głosu?
Thank you, Matthias. Yes, it was wonderful to meet you in Brussels. And it showed immediately the power of peer support, especially in those challenging circumstances, such as the European Parliament. But let me start by speaking about my personal experiences. I am Jolijn Santegoets. I'm the founder of organization Mind Rights in the Netherlands. And I'm a co-chair of the World Network of Users and Survivors of Psychiatry. And also a board member of the European Network of Users, ex-users, and survivors of psychiatry. And I'm a person with lived experience myself. And I will start by sharing an outline of my personal experiences and how I started from grassroots with my advocacy work. So as an adolescent at age 16, I faced my own psychosocial problems, and I thought I was weird, and I attempted suicide. And I was then involuntarily institutionalized in a psychiatric institution, and almost immediately I was solitary confined, forcefully drugged, and strapped with restraint belts on a bed. And this regime lasted almost 2 years continuously. And this was all done to prevent suicide. But it only made me feel more miserable and suicidal, and it was just horrible. And in response, my self-destructive behavior only increased. And then this was called a severe mental illness, which was called borderline personality disorder. And I never felt this was appropriate. The repressive treatment was traumatizing, and it was causing all these escalations. And they should have paid attention to the social meaning of my behavior and the fact that I just couldn't live like that in this cell, so degrading. So these experiences illustrate that forced treatments make it only worse, and they are not to be called mental health care. So then luckily, I was transferred to another ward where I was not locked up 24/7 anymore. And I no longer felt surrounded by enemies who were, because at this other place, I felt that they were only hurting me. And at this place, I felt surrounded by human people who wanted to genuinely support me in finding out how I could live and build up a life again. And they were not perfect, but I developed new hope and I stopped feeling suicidal. So eventually I left the institution and I became homeless. And to me, this meant freedom to make my own choices and develop my own identity. And I managed to find my own way. And I have a satisfying life now. I just clearly needed positive chances to recover. All I needed was my freedom to discover my identity and to find my way. And a very core value in mental health care is first, do no harm. Yet, despite this principle, I have been harmed by mental health care. And it appears that many people have similar horrible experiences of a rigid, repressive mental health care system that does not facilitate recovery, but it traumatizes people and it neglects social meaning. And the collective harm caused by psychiatry, that motivated me to become an activist against forced treatment, because forced treatment cannot be called care. So how did I start my activism? Because I learned that this is about grassroots, and I would like to share this personal story. So after my horrible experiences with forced treatment, I tried to access justice. And my friends knew that I was trying this, and they knew about my complaints. And at some point, I was alerted that once again, young people in the institution were subjected to the same regime. And I got so angry. And all I wanted to do was do something about it. This was in 2003. And then after I received this text message on my mobile phone, I just took a train in the direction of this particular mental health hospital. And in the meantime, in the train, I tried to figure out, like, what should I do? And then I decided that I had to make it public. So I actually went to a store and I bought paper and a fat marker, and I started writing slogans on the papers. And then I spread those in in the surroundings, in the area of the hospital. And then the next day it was in the newspaper as an anonymous protest against solitary confinement. I was proud and I thought, okay, this works. Let's do it again. So with some groups, with some other peers, I formed this informal group called Rage Against Isolation. And we started a website and we did some more awareness raising, like spreading leaflets. We started petitions. We organized street marches. We had information stalls at conferences and so on. And along the way, I got more and more invitations for interviews, for consultation, and for presentations. And so the initiative became more and more known. And due to some financial luck, I was actually able to register the initiative as an official foundation in 2006. So my advocacy started with spreading leaflet at a spontaneous moment in 2003. And by now I'm a co-chair of the World Network of Users and Survivors in Psychiatry. And as a matter of fact, when I was institutionalized, nobody was listening to my arguments why forced treatments are wrong. And now, by now, I get invited to give speeches about the very same thing. And there are entire conferences like the one in Brussels dedicated to the abolition of coercion. And for me, this means so much because when I was confined, I already knew it was wrong and nobody was listening. And by now, the world is changing because of the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. So I would like to speak a bit more about this human rights framework. One key principle under the human rights is the awareness that every person is unique. And the human diversity is represented in each one of us. And we're all equal members of the human family. And equal recognition before the law is therefore a human right enshrined in many UN treaties. And it recognizes that every person counts equally and that everyone has the same right to have their voice heard. So the principle of respect for diversity is rooted in the recognition that all persons have their own identity and they are entitled to have their own perceptions and feelings and experiences, reality, character, and the firm belief that people are the experts about their own lives and about the choices and decisions they make in life is reflected in the call to respect diversity. And this is enshrined in the right to legal capacity, which also acknowledges that persons themselves are the experts about their own lives. And they give people the legal right to decide for themselves according to their own will and choices and preferences. So having independent authority over your own life and over your own affairs and your decisions is a core human right and a principle. And this is reflected in the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. And I'll skip a little bit here. So all people have the right to legal capacity and equal recognition as being a person under the law and to enjoy all the rights and freedoms on an equal basis with others. So under Article 12 of this UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, in the general comment, it is explained that perceived or actual deficits in mental capacity must not be used as a justification for the deprivation of legal capacity. So the existence of a disability cannot be used as a justification to take somebody's rights away. So instead of the denial of legal capacity, there's a right to support in the exercise of legal capacity, which is supported decision-making. A legal capacity can be explained as the right to decide and the right to act and the right to self-determination about your own life. Because your choices define who you are. And legal capacity is like a gate to all other rights. For example, the right to marry and to found a family is not possible without having legal capacity and the right to choose and decide for yourself. And similarly, the right to choose a place of residence or the right to free and informed consent for healthcare cannot be executed without legal capacity, without having the right to decide for yourself. Yet, as we probably all know, the right to legal capacity is not always respected by mental health care services. And this is especially clear in the context of forced treatments and forced admissions, where the voice of the person concerned is no longer taken as a guidance, but other people are taking over the decision-making. That is called substitute decision-making. And this means that somebody else, often a family member or a guardian or the institution staff, take decisions over your life. For example, on mental health treatment, on where to live, or on how to spend your money, etc. But the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities prohibits forced treatments and the deprivation of legal capacity and liberty and other rights. So the UNCRPD committee, which is the committee tasked with interpreting and giving guidance on how the UN Convention works, they stated in their general comment on Article 12, unsoundness of mind and other discriminatory labels are not legitimate reasons for the denial of legal capacity. And they also describe the involuntary detention of persons with disabilities based on risks of dangerousness or alleged need for treatment or other reasons tied to impairment or disability or health diagnosis. All of these reasons are contrary to the right to liberty, and they amount to arbitrary detention. Institutionalization is in fact discrimination because it demonstrates a failure to create support in the community, and therefore it leads to exclusion. So the practice of forced treatments and forced institutionalization and guardianships are recognized as violations of human rights under the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities. So besides the fact that this is a human rights violation, also the deprivation of legal capacity and the voice of the person is also counterproductive to health and well-being, because being forced into treatment against your will doesn't foster well-being or recovery at all. Forced treatments actually undermine trust, and they bring fear to the person subjected, and that is disabling any meaningful contact with your surroundings. It makes it impossible to develop meaningful relations with the persons around you. So all the efforts of mental health care are basically useless when they use force. When your voice is not heard and not respected, it hurts. And in my personal experiences, the forced treatments, they gave me the feeling as if nobody was able to understand me, not even the professionals. And it made me feel very alone and lost and desolate. And I was exposed to forced treatments because of suicidal feelings. And even speaking about those problems could result in further restrictions. Yet, all those forced treatments didn't stop the suicidal feelings, and it only made me feel more miserable. So that cannot be called support or mental health care. It was a violation. And I only got out because I was transferred, when the focus was no longer on preventing risks, and they focused on well-being and opportunities. And they allowed me to explore new things in life, and that gave me new hope. And eventually, my desperate and suicidal feelings reduced. So for me, it's very clear that real support for mental health and well-being is something fully different and opposite to coercion. So legal capacity is a fundamental right, a human right, and it forms the key to other rights. And in addition, the right to have your voice heard is also a necessity for any meaningful support relation, and it is the basis for human contact. The equal recognition before the law and the respect for legal capacity are intimately related to respect for dignity and identity. And the denial of legal capacity is often compared as a civil death, because you stop being a person when your voice is taken away. So despite the fact that the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities prohibits the denial of legal capacity, the practice of depriving persons of their legal capacity is unfortunately still widespread. And in recent years, some states have undertaken law reform processes. And in some places, the practices of supported decision-making have been put in place. Yet, across Europe, the mental health system still comprises a mix of voluntary and involuntary support and service. So a further push is needed to ban forced treatments and ensure respect for the legal capacity of each person. And while the protests against forced treatments have always existed, always, because people have been expressing very clearly their no, many people felt disempowered by the system. But now the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disability provides us with a very strong tool to unite all our efforts in a collective push for change. And this is an unprecedented opportunity to change the top-down mental health system into a bottom-up system, which is sensitive and flexible to the needs of the persons concerned, with full respect for their legal capacity. So the right to legal capacity means that the person's voice is the central driver of support, in line with the will and the wishes and the preferences of the person concerned. And the United Nations Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities therefore presents a need for a revolution in mental health care services, which has been long dreamed of by many of us. The CRPD calls for ending coercion and realizing support for inclusion in the community on an equal basis with others, with the same opportunities and the same rights and the same freedoms as others, and no discrimination on the basis of disability. So I would like to encourage everyone to join in promoting a human rights-based approach in mental health care. Thank you for your attention.
Bardzo z tego serca dziękuję. Tak, podsumowując, bo teraz będziemy mieć krótką przerwę. Jeżeli mógłbym prosić każdego z uczestników, by zastanowił się nad pytaniami na temat budowy tożsamości oddolnej tutaj w Polsce, również o dowolności interpretacji własnych doświadczeń, do prawa do złości, do przykrości, do radości, do szczęścia, do bycia rodzicem. Bez interpretacji, czy ja mogę, czy nie mogę. W Polsce jest dużo szpitali psychiatrycznych, ale to nie mury tworzą podejście, lecz ludzie zatrudnieni w tych instytucjach. Wartość oddechu każdego z nas jest ta sama. Nie ma lepszych i gorszych. Dlatego też proszę teraz uczestników o 10 minut przerwy, przygotowania pytań. Może wspólnie zastanowimy się nad tym, jak takie działania rozpocząć, mimo niskiej zasobności w portfelu często. Mimo tego, że wystawienie się na stygmę społeczną może wiązać się z utratą pracy. Ale może warto zainwestować w swój własny głos, niż tylko właśnie wspierać i oczekiwać, że coś się zmieni odgórnie. Dlatego też zapraszam na chwilę przerwy.
There'll be a pause now of 10 minutes.
And we are asking you to think over certain questions that will appear, especially with reference to the mental health system and how we can break through certain difficulties of people who experienced difficult mental issues and without any money, sometimes homeless. How can they change the system from this position, being forced into the role of the patient? So these are some of the questions that can come up after the break, after 10 minutes break.
I want to explain emotional CPR a little bit. Apparently the translation didn't come across right.
Mhm.
It somehow it got translated as artificial breathing instead of emotional resuscitation.
Ocena
Czyli chciałby Daniel jeszcze wytłumaczyć, że że jakoś to sformułowanie, tak, tego podejścia, nazwa tego podejścia została przetłumaczona jako reanimacja, emocjonalna reanimacja.
So maybe if I could just have a minute at the beginning to clarify that and make sure everyone has the email for the if they're interested in the training.
Więc chciałby tutaj przekazać też wszystkim zainteresowanym osobom e-mail, żeby można było do niego napisać. Ci, którzy są zainteresowani tym szkoleniem, tym podejściem.
Również mamy już przygotowane pytania na to po polsku. One są dostępne na czacie Zuza.
We have some questions from the chat, from our audience, our participants, people that were listening to you, to us.
Sure.
Jakbyśmy mogli, Zuzanna, jakbyś mogła je przeczytać, tak?
I will read them out. Maybe the first one that is addressed to you and to Mateusz too, because this is an anonymous attendee who's saying, I have people around me who suffer from different mental crises. Some of them are very young, and the system in Poland offers them the revolving door in hospitals and injections and treat them beneath the dignity, callously forcing them into the role of incurably ill patients, and nothing indicates that it can change for the better or change. And the reforms just solidify this this relation, this condition or their conditions. So how is it possible to help them here and now, despite the limitations from the side of the system?
That's directed to me.
Yes, it's directed to you. Mateusz, czy powinniśmy zostawić Danielowi teraz chwilę na odpowiedź, czy przeczytamy inne pytania i powrócimy do tego?
Mi się wydaje, że możemy przeczytać jakby wszelkie pytania, że można wtedy będzie nawiązywać, tak? I mam nadzieję, że te pytania już się skończą. Bo nie będzie to na wszystkie, a tych tematów jest dużo i głównie opierają się na leczeniu i też na tych podejściach, więc jeżeli mogliśmy przeczytać wszystkie, a później mam nadzieję, że dyskutujemy też.
Okay, so we're going to read out all the questions first, and then you could refer to some of them that are addressed directly to you or maybe to others too. So we could have a discussion. So the second question is from Oscar. Which is an autotelic value in contact with people suffering from mental disorders?
Well, I didn't catch that. What is a what value?
An autotelic. So a value in itself. Yeah, I would interpret it that way.
Okay.
In contact
Value in
with
itself.
people suffering from mental disorders. Maybe Oscar could somehow help us to figure out what he really meant.
Could be rights. Could be a question of what are the human rights of people.
Może jest to kwestia praw człowieka.
And
Ta wartość autoteliczna związana z cierpieniem ludzi cierpiących na choroby psychiczne.
Okay, the first question is comes from an anonymous attendee and states how can people who have gone through the experiences of mental health hospital, how can they get strength for life as they have no money? So how can they change the system from the position, inferior position, or the position where they are? Has it worked out anywhere?
Myślę o tych pytaniach, które są bardzo ogólne, a pozostałe przetłumaczymy i wyślemy mailing z prośbą do Daniela czy do Janine odpowiedź. Zbierzmy te pytania, które są takie
So we'll just
ogólne.
collect some of the questions and others we can send you via email. But next question would be, what is the sustainability of grassroots movements developed by people with lived experience? do your organizations have certain instruments to support peer support empowerment or patient empowerment? So organizations like Human-Foundation or others that were indicated by the line. So that would be the question about the instruments you have to encourage patient empowerment. That's how it was stated.
Ja bardzo przepraszam, ale osoby głuche, które nas oglądają, nie mają dostępu do informacji, ponieważ pani cały czas mówi w języku angielskim, a my nie mamy tutaj tłumaczenia na język polski, więc
A nie ma czatu, nie ma czatu.
Jest, wszystkie te pytania są w czacie.
ale nikt nie poinformował o tym, że jest w czasie.
Dobrze, dobrze, także przeczytamy.
Tak, tylko
Nie.
momencik. Tak.
Czyli to ostatnie pytanie to jest: z doświadczenia Państwa prelegentów, jaka jest trwałość ruchów tworzonych oddolnie przez osoby z doświadczeniem kryzysu psychicznego? Czy organizacje takie jak Fundacja Człowiek albo te wymienione przez Jolene Santegetz mają instrumenty, by wspierać patient empowerment? Sorry, Jolene, if I pronounced your surname badly. I don't know if you can help us to maybe to.
It was fine, but
Yes. Dobrze. Pierwsze pytanie też tutaj podamy. Pytanie do pana doktora Daniela Fischera i do pana Mateusza Biernata. Mam wokół siebie ludzi, którzy cierpią z powodu kryzysów psychicznych. Niektórzy są bardzo młodzi. System w Polsce oferuje im obrotowe drzwi w szpitalu, zastrzyki i traktowanie poniżej ich godności, bezdusznie wtłaczając w rolę nieuleczalnie chorych. Nic nie wskazuje na to, żeby miało się to szybko zmienić. Reformy tylko betonują ten układ. Jak pomagać im tu i teraz, pomimo ograniczeń systemowych? Pytanie od pana Oskara. Jaka to jest wartość autoteliczna w kontakcie z osobami cierpiącymi na zaburzenia psychiczne? Później kolejne pytanie. Ludzie, którzy przeszli przez szpital psychiatryczny, skąd mają wziąć siłę na życie? Nie mają pieniędzy, a mają zmieniać system. Czy to się gdzieś udało? And then I will switch into English, as we had to read out questions in Polish. Okay, and the next question is from Karolina Załuska. Hi, I have one question about the role and place of general practitioners in mental health system in your countries, and which role played GPs in your experiences? Positive, negative, none? Or you met only psychiatrists on your way? So I think psychiatrists on your way. Should I repeat or?
Yeah, who was that for?
Anyone? Probably.
Anyone, yeah. Także pytanie od pani Karoliny. Dzień dobry, mam pytanie na temat roli i miejsca lekarzy rodzinnych, ogólnych w systemie zdrowia psychicznego w państwa krajach. Może też jest to takie pytanie, jaką rolę odgrywali lekarze rodzinni w Państwa historii, w tych doświadczeniach, które Państwo mieli, pozytywną, negatywną, może żadną. Może też Państwo spotkali tylko psychiatrów na swojej drodze. So once again, this question. Hi, I have only one question about the role and place of general practitioners, GPs, in mental health system in your countries. Which role played GPs in your experiences? Positive, negative, none. Maybe you met only psychiatrists on your way. And the next question may be first in Polish, then in English. Bywają przypadki, kiedy zachowanie pacjenta jest autodestrukcyjne. W jaki sposób w takim razie postępować z takim pacjentem, jeśli przymus bezpośredni powoduje upokorzenie? So there are some cases when the patient's behavior is autodestructive. In that situation, how should we deal with such a patient if direct coercive measures cause humiliation? So what else could we do, as I understood, what else could we do in such difficult cases of patients with autodestructive behaviors?
Autodestructive is suicidal, is that?
Probably.
Self-harming.
Self-harming, yeah.
Myślę, że tych pytań jest tak dużo i tak są rozległe, że chyba będziemy musieli zrobić niedługo kolejny seminarium z samymi pytaniami.
Okay, so there are many questions to you, and it's maybe impossible to answer all of them during one seminar. So we would somehow have to figure out maybe and stop in a certain moment to give you some space for discussion.
Ale wszystkie trzy historie, gdzieś same pytania jeszcze mocniej poruszają, jeszcze większy płomień, żeby to za chwileczkę zacząć zmieniać. Tak? Bo są to mocne w tym momencie słowa dotyczące podejścia człowieka do człowieka.
But all your stories somehow inspired us to move into this direction of a change. And we hope to have the space here to talk about it and to change and to be maybe closer to others, to the human being.
Pytanie.
Comment? Could I comment? I'd like to answer not question by question, but some general answer.
Okay.
Okay?
Chciałbym tutaj odpowiedzieć, jeżeli mogę, nie pytań, idąc po pytaniu, ale w ogólnych zarysach na to, co padło.
In order to improve conditions and create voluntary alternatives to the coercive system,
aby zmniejszyć przymus i żeby wprowadzić zmiany w systemie zdrowia psychicznego,
it's very important to organize together with other advocates. You can't do this alone, and you need to have organized groups of advocates, like Jolene was describing.
Konieczne jest zorganizowanie się w grupy osób, które mogą być rzecznikami. Nie da się tego dokonać samemu. Trzeba tworzyć tego rodzaju grupy, o jakich mówiła Jolene.
We've been organizing for 50 years in the United States, starting and starting at the local level with self-help and advocacy groups that amplify our voice.
Zaczęliśmy działać w Stanach Zjednoczonych 50 lat temu i zaczęliśmy na poziomie lokalnym, jeśli chodzi o orzecznictwo i grupy samopomocy, co pozwoliło nam wzmocnić nasz głos.
We gradually have been able to obtain government funding at a local and a national level. For instance, our National Empowerment Center is funded by our federal government.
Stopniowo udało nam się pozyskać fundusze rządowe, najpierw na poziomie lokalnym, a potem narodowym. I nasza organizacja na przykład otrzymuje fundusze już od rządu federalnego.
So we can't be as radical when we get government funding. We do connect people, and then we form voluntary, more radical groups.
Jako organizacja, która jest finansowana przez rząd federalny, nie możemy być bardzo radykalni, ale to, co robimy, to łączymy ludzi ze sobą, przekazując ich jakby do grup bardziej radykalnych, bardziej zaawansowanych.
The worry with getting money is that you get co-opted, and they suppress the strength of your message.
Prawda jest taka, że otrzymywanie pieniędzy sprawia, iż zaczynamy współpracować i w jakiś sposób przytłacza to siłę naszego przekazu.
There is one very important alternative that we've been especially promoting. We call it peer-run voluntary respite care as an alternative to hospitalization.
I jest pewna alternatywa, którą bardzo promujemy, i jest to złożona, wolontaryjna służba polegająca na organizacji ośrodków, w których można otrzymać pomoc w kryzysie, które są alternatywą dla standardowych szpitali psychiatrycznych.
Another alternative is this emotional CPR, which is emotional resuscitation, really. It's a way that any lay person can help another person through a crisis. So again, to prevent hospitalization.
Inną alternatywą jest wspomniana już reanimacja emocjonalna. ECPR można przetłumaczyć jako reanimację, resuscytację. I jest to sposób, w jaki każda osoba nie będąca profesjonalistą może wesprzeć kogoś w kryzysie psychicznym.
And if you're interested in a training, you can contact our coordinator, Christoph, at ecprpoland@gmail.com. ecprpoland@gmail.com.
I jeżeli ktoś jest zainteresowany takim szkoleniem, może skontaktować się z koordynatorem naszej tutaj misji w Polsce, powiedzmy, pod adresem ecprpoland@gmail.com.
Thank you.
Dziękuję bardzo.
Ja tak jeszcze na sekundkę może zabiorę głos.
Maybe I'll just speak for a second.
Nasza fundacja ruszyła z budową mapy wsparcia.
Our foundation has started to set up a network, a map of support.
Wiemy również, że kontekst biedy i zależności bierze się z pieniędzy.
And we know that the context of poverty, of dependence, comes from this disorder.
Dlatego też uruchomimy
And the
zrzutkę.
lack of money.
Uruchomimy zrzutkę, na które
And
będziemy
that's why we would organize a collective money
żeby zbierać na tego typu działania,
to have enough money for such actions,
po to, żeby ten głos był cały czas niezależny.
just to keep this voice independent.
Po raz pierwszy proszę o pieniądze.
And it's the first time I'm asking for money
Dla nas.
for us.
Dziękuję.
Thank you.
Maybe I could respond.
Yeah.
Może ja odpowiem.
Yes, also with the many organizations that I work with, we face the issue of funding.
A w wielu organizacjach, z którymi współpracuję, również zmagamy się z problemem finansowania.
And like Daniel said, indeed, government funding can bring some risks with it.
I jak już Daniel wspomniał, finansowanie odgórne rządowe łączy się z pewnym ryzykiem.
And the same goes for money from the pharmaceutical industry, which is rejected by organizations such as World Network and European Network of Users and Ex-Users and Survivors of Psychiatry.
Również pozyskiwanie finansowania od firm farmaceutycznych wiąże się z ryzykiem i doświadcza tego wiele organizacji europejskich, również Europejska Sieć Osób Korzystających i byłych osób korzystających z systemu zdrowia.
I ocalałych z psychiatrii.
So the other option is philanthropy. There are organizations that give money to charities, like for example, Open Society.
Inną możliwością jest korzystanie ze wsparcia organizacji filantropijnych, które wspierają działania w tym obszarze. I na przykład taką organizacją jest Open Society.
But there are more. For example, there's organization Civitates.
Ale też są inne organizacje, między innymi taka, która nazywa się Civitates.
So I would recommend going into the direction of philanthropy.
Tak więc osobiście doradzałabym kierowanie się w stronę filantropii szeroko pojętej, działań charytatywnych.
Because that gives the most independence for your own agenda.
Ponieważ to daje największą możliwość zachowania własnego programu i niezależność.
And also there is European funding, but it is as complicated as government funding. You have to do a lot of reports, and they give often this 20%, 80% balance. So you have to have money to be able to get money. So when you're poor, there's no way.
Można również pozyskiwać fundusze europejskie, ale to również wiąże się z niedogodnościami, ze względu na to, iż trzeba bardzo intensywnie się raportować i zgłaszać swoje działania, jak również wymagane jest 20 do 80% wkładu własnego, w związku z czym no, dostajesz pieniądze tylko wtedy, kiedy masz pieniądze, jeżeli jesteś biedny, nie masz szans.
But as a message of hope, The European network of users and survivors of psychiatry has been operating mostly without funding as volunteers. And then, for example, Mental Health Europe could organize this meeting in the European Parliament. And because we were organized and visible, even though as volunteers without resources, they knew where to reach out to invite us. So they paid everything. So we didn't need the money for that advocacy.
Natomiast nadzieją może napełniać fakt, iż na przykład europejska sieć osób, które korzystały bądź przetrwały w systemie usługi systemu zdrowia psychicznego, jest niezależna i pozyskuje fundusze na swoją działalność. Natomiast organizacja Mental Health Europe na przykład miała możliwość zorganizowania spotkania w Parlamencie Europejskim i to było spotkanie przez Parlament opłacone. Te fundusze zostały pozyskane, ponieważ im bardziej jest się widocznym, tym większa szansa przyciągnięcia funduszy.
So just believe in your ideas and you'll get there.
Także wystarczy wierzyć w swoją ideę i uda się wam.
Okay, I would like to add something.
Chciałbym jeszcze dodać do tego coś.
Is it possible?
Czy to możliwe?
Yes. Well, Julien, reaching into the European Parliament is already high level. This is already.
Julian, muszę przyznać,
This
że
is a
tutaj
long, long way.
dostanie się do Parlamentu Europejskiego to już jest wysoki poziom i bardzo długa droga.
And I was thinking more about how it is, within the grassroots movement, how difficult it is, or how much support it needs to bring people together.
I zastanawiałem się, jak to wygląda z perspektywy ruchów oddolnych, ile wsparcia jest potrzebne, żeby zebrać ludzi razem.
And how difficult this is to find the people who are on the same wavelength with you and will go along for a while.
I jak właściwie na ile to jest trudne, żeby znaleźć takie osoby, które nadają na tych samych falach i mogą do was dołączyć i działać razem z wami.
And what I witnessed is if there's a coherence in a group that stick together and they support each other, there's a chance that something more will develop.
I tak to, co zaobserwowałem, to, że jeżeli jest pewna spójność w grupie, tak, że oni się ci ludzie trzymają się razem, to ma to szansę zadziałać.
And what I also see is the more independent the peer movement has been, the more successful they've been.
I też to, co zaobserwowałem, to, że im bardziej niezależny był ruch pacjentów, osób z doświadczeniem, tym większy sukces idzie za tym.
So it's also a question for us, or as professionals, how to support you and this movement to do your own thing, because you look at things from another point of view, and it's as right as the things what we see. It's your way.
Więc dla nas jest, jako specjalistów, jest to takie pytanie, jak was wesprzeć, bo tutaj jakby nie ma lepszej czy gorszej drogi, ale tak, żebyście mogli działać dalej.
You know about the X-in movement within Europe.
Wiecie zapewne o tym ruchu X-in, który rozwija się w Europie.
And the different ways some of them go.
I o tych drogach, które ten ruch czy jego członkowie obierają.
And some of them try to get close to the system to support the system to get better.
Niektóre z tych osób z tego ruchu gdzieś tam starają się zbliżyć do tego systemu, żeby właśnie wesprzeć pewnego rodzaju zmianę.
And others say, no, we won't get close to the system because the system has a tendency to colonialize ideas and in the end sell them as their own ideas.
A inni nie będą wcale chcieli współpracować z tym tradycyjnym systemem, ponieważ on ma taką tendencję do kolonizowania pewnych poglądów i włączania ich jako swoje.
So this it's become important for me to be aware that the strength of your movement is your independency for me, from what I see.
I dla mnie siła waszego ruchu, to co stało się takie ważne dla mnie osobiście, to że siła waszego ruchu właśnie tkwi w tej niezależności.
Yes, and their small initiatives are all over the place. Small initiatives who also get funding.
I te małe inicjatywy gdzieś tam pojawiają się, rozwijają w wielu różnych miejscach i one także zdobywają finansowanie.
And some of them might be called anti-psychiatric, but wow, yes, we need some people who say, no, we don't want this.
Niektóre nawet mogą iść w stronę antypsychiatrii, ale może tego też potrzebujemy.
Well, maybe a last word about these terrible situations when you use coercive treatment, when you don't find any other way to do it, to keep safety for things, safety for one's life or whatever.
Może jeszcze ostatnie słowo na temat tej sytuacji, kiedy wydaje się, że nie ma innych zastępów przymusu, kiedy bezpieczeństwo jest ważniejsze.
Yes, and one thing what that became more and more important to me is to teach young people that this is a reality of the system. Sometimes you cannot but use some force.
I dla mnie to stało się ważne, żeby jednak przekazywać tą wiedzę młodym, że czasem taka jest po prostu rzeczywistość tego systemu i nie da się inaczej niż z użyciem siły.
If they just know that if this happens, there should be something talked about the mutual helplessness in these moments.
Ale myślę, że jeżeli to już się dzieje, to bardzo ważne jest, żeby gdzieś tam jednak mieć taką możliwość na kazanie swojej bezsilności, omówienia tej bezsilności, która pojawia się po dwóch stronach.
Which could be a basis for to better overcome these terrible moments.
I to może stanowić jakąś podstawę do tego, żeby przekroczyć, jakoś przejść przez te straszne chwile.
Okay.
Że tak teraz zaapeluję do wszystkich bogatych ludzi na świecie.
Maybe I'll just few words to all the rich in the world.
Żeby wspierali inicjatywy tak
We
fantastyczne.
want to support our initiatives.
Jolene wants to say something.
Can I?
Nie.
Yeah, about the topic of safety and coercion. I do have a slightly different position.
Jeśli chodzi o kwestię bezpieczeństwa i przymusu, mam tutaj nieco inne stanowisko.
I think there are a couple of steps to be made.
Trzeba tutaj dokonać kilku kroków.
So in the emergency situation, when somebody is having a knife or standing on the rooftop,
W sytuacji krytycznej, absolutnie, kiedy ktoś dzierży nóż albo stoi już na dachu, żeby skoczyć,
I don't think it's the issue of disability to take away the knife or to take the person away from the edge.
myślę, że tutaj nie jest kwestią pozbawiającą praw zabranie komuś noża czy odepchnięcie go od krawędzi.
So it applies to everyone. If a person has a knife on the streets, they will be forced to have the knife taken away.
I oczywiście odnosi się to do każdego. No jeżeli ktoś wymachuje nożem na ulicy, no to ten nóż mu zabiorą.
But it is different from psychiatric coercion.
Ale to jest kwestia zupełnie odmienna od przymusu stosowanego w leczeniu psychiatrycznym.
For example, when a person throws a brick through a window and has no disability, no label of schizophrenia, the person will be maybe in the police office for one day and be released with a fine. While when you have a diagnosis, you will be locked up much longer, punished much harder, lose many more rights.
Jeżeli osoba zdrowa psychicznie, bez tego naznaczenia i ograniczenia praw, rzuci cegłą i stłucze okno, to zostanie zatrzymana w najgorszym wypadku na 48 godzin. Natomiast jeżeli ta osoba ma orzeczenie, to w tym momencie posiedzi znacznie dłużej i będzie się to wiązało ze znacznie większym ograniczeniem jej praw.
And that response is wrong. To deprive persons of rights is only giving more panic.
I to pozbawienie praw sprawia, że osoba odczuwa jeszcze większą panikę.
So this is called de-escalation. It is a skills and a technique, and it's about being present and about bringing peace to the situation, bringing safety. Totally the opposite of coercion.
I coś takiego powoduje jedynie eskalację problemu. Więc to, co jest potrzebne, to poczucie bezpieczeństwa, uspokojenie w tej sytuacji, wniesienie do niej czegoś pozytywnego, co jest dokładnym przeciwieństwem przymusu.
And acts like coercion, like solitary confinement, or even imprisonment in regular prison, is only telling the person, no, you should not behave like this. But it's not teaching the person any valuable skills.
I umieszczenie kogoś w izolatce, czy przymknięcie nawet kogoś w takim zwykłym więzieniu mówi osobie, tego nie możesz robić, ale w żaden sposób nie uczy jej jakiejkolwiek praktycznej zdolności bądź umiejętności.
And even more, as experience with solitary confinement, when the nurses lock the door, they turn their back on you and they walk away. How can they call this care? I call it not care.
A co więcej, ja znając z własnego doświadczenia, jak to jest być zamkniętym w izolatce, wiem, że pielęgniarka albo pielęgniarz przekręca klucz i sobie idzie. I cóż to ma być opieka, a to jest po prostu kpina z opieki, tak to nazywam.
So the key is de-escalation.
Więc kluczem jest tutaj deeskalacja.
And no coercion.
A nie przymus.
From my personal experiences, the moment I
Mojego
was
własnego
locked up,
doświadczenia
my problems increased the escalation increased, everything got worse.
Z mojego doświadczenia wynika, że przy stosowaniu przymusu moje problemy tylko się pogarszały, następowała eskalacja całej sytuacji i wszystko po prostu stawało się coraz gorsze. Wszystko się pogarszało zamiast się polepszać.
So internationally, I am involved with several groups who push for absolute prohibition of all coercion.
A więc działam międzynarodowo w kilku grupach, które walczą o całkowite zaprzestanie stosowania przymusu.
Thank you.
Dziękuję bardzo.
There's also one question from a person listening to us on YouTube, and this question is addressed to Daniel. I'm not sure whether it's the right moment to read it out, or would you like, Daniel?
I see the question, Suzanne. I see it. I read it.
Okay. Okay.
I just want to be conscious of time because I can go a little later if it's okay with people. 5 minutes maybe. It's true. I had some trouble with memory in the months after my what do we call it? My travel into other realities, which is labeled psychosis. I don't like that term, but I did have some trouble with my memory.
To prawda.
Go ahead. Go ahead.
Rzeczywiście doświadczyłem problemów z pamięcią w jakiś czas po mojej podróży w inne wymiary rzeczywistości, którą nazywa się psychozą, chociaż ja tego określenia bardzo nie lubię. Tak, doświadczyłem problemów z pamięcią.
I was in medical school in the 70s and we were very collective. So we helped each other out a lot in our studies. We had study groups and we supported each other. Even if people didn't have a psychiatric problem, medical school is a lot to try to remember.
W latach 70., kiedy uczęszczałem na Akademię Medyczną, a nasze życie studenckie było takie bardzo społeczne. Pomagaliśmy sobie nawzajem, organizowaliśmy grupy, które razem się uczyły i wsparcie dotyczyło nie tylko osób z problemami psychicznymi, było ono ogólne.
Also, stay socially connected is very important for memory. Staying socially connected and staying in conversation with friends and family. So don't be isolated. That isolation, I think, makes memory problems worse.
Bardzo ważne jest w takich przypadkach, żeby zachować łączność w relacjach społecznych, żeby je podtrzymywać, ponieważ w rozmowie ta pamięć ulega poprawie. Natomiast istotne jest, żeby się nie izolować, bo problemy z pamięcią będą się nasilały.
I want to say one more word about emotional CPR. It doesn't solve everything, but you can reach people through nonverbal approaches that you can't reach verbally. So when the mental health system says, "Oh, we couldn't reach this person, so we had to hospitalize them," I think the more people that are taught these nonverbal emotional ways of connecting, then there'll be less crises and less. It's a prevention, less hospitalization.
To chciałbym tutaj dodać jeszcze kilka słów na temat reanimacji emocjonalnej. Nie jest ona rozwiązaniem i odpowiedzią na wszystko, ale jest pewien aspekt, w którym jest bardzo pomocna i jest to fakt, iż świadczy ona wsparcie w sposób niewerbalny. Ponieważ system bardzo często stwierdza, że no nie zdołaliśmy mu pomóc, bo nie zdołaliśmy się z nim dogadać, werbalnie nie dało się tego dokonać, no to wsadźmy go do szpitala. Natomiast
these classes are online. They can be, you can engage in the emotional resuscitation, emotional CPR. You can engage in it online. So no matter where you are, in Poland or any other country.
Natomiast zastosowanie reanimacji emocjonalnej skutkuje zmniejszeniem się ilości kryzysów i jest środkiem zapobiegawczym. I jeżeli interesuje kogokolwiek kurs w tej metodzie, to są one dostępne przez internet w każdym miejscu na świecie i można bez problemu skorzystać.
Dziękuję bardzo.
Ja mam takie pytanie, bo czas seminarium powoli
I
dobiega
have a
końca.
question. We're coming out of time slowly.
Mam pytanie do
We're
prelegentów.
approaching the end of our seminar. I have a question to our guests here.
Czy chcą z nami jeszcze zostać, bo tych pytań nie będą, cała masa się uruchomiła. Powoli
There
patrzę.
is a mass of questions, so I don't know if you would like to stay with us a little bit longer.
Czy jednak będziemy
Or
organizować kolejne spotkania i
should
będziemy
we
się sieciować?
just organize other webinars or seminars and networking to respond to more of them?
To, co powiedział też Werner,
As Werner put it,
gdybym miał dużą ilość pieniędzy, na pewno bym szkolił lekarzy, pielęgniarki i osoby, które doświadczyły hospitalizacji,
if
wykluczenia
I had
społecznego.
enough money, I would organize such trainings for nurses and other staff, members of staff.
Również przede wszystkim osoby, które doświadczyły izolacji też społecznej przede wszystkim, ze względu na diagnozę, naznaczenia.
And especially for those who have lived experience and experienced the diagnosis, mental health diagnosis.
Bo nic nie pomaga jak właśnie rozwój, tak? A on jest naznaczony cierpieniem.
Because nothing helps better than development, which is somehow immersed in misery, suffering.
Izolacja powoduje to, że tracimy możliwości tworzenia własnego życia poza murami szpitala.
And isolation makes us unable to look for our own ways outside of the psychiatric hospital.
I jak człowiek wyzdrowieje, to musi nadrabiać, czyli jeszcze większy stres.
And if a person is released and recovered, then this person needs to make up for everything what has happened. So it's an inferior position.
Więcej dla ludzi, a trochę może mniej na medycynę.
So maybe we should focus more on people and maybe less on medicine.
I budynki nowe.
And new buildings. This is important.
Okej. Nie wiem, pytanie prelegentów, czy ktoś jeszcze chce zostać z nami, czy jednak...
I think I'd be glad to come back for another webinar. I don't have a lot more time today, but also if people wanted to send you some questions by email, I'm willing to, if they're translated, I'm willing to respond.
Dzisiaj już niestety nie mam więcej czasu, ale możecie równie dobrze rzeczywiście zorganizować następne seminarium albo też wysłać mi pytania przetłumaczone na maila i chętnie na nie odpowiem.
Ja może tylko powiem, Nelson Mandela powiedział takie zdanie, że edukacja jest najpotężniejszą zbronią na świecie. Więc tutaj
Nelson Mandela said a sentence that education is the most powerful weapon.
A wy jesteście prelegenci chodzącą kopalnią, encyklopedią wiedzy, jak budować
And you are the richest book of knowledge.
Tak, mimo że wiatr wieje bardzo silno.
Mine of knowledge, even though there is a wind
Ale ludzie w izolatoriach,
blowing.
There's wind.
Yeah.
tak, ale ludzie w izolatoriach tacy jak my czekają tam na nadzieję i wiarę, że można to zrobić.
But people like us in isolation rooms are waiting with hope for a change.
Okej, już skończę.
I want to thank Jolene and Werner and Mateusz and Monica, Suzanne, Magda. Thank you to all of you. Dziękuję for all.
Dziękujemy.
Dziękujemy.
This is going to be the official end now?
Czy to
Teraz
będzie
już
już
oficjalnie kończymy?
Możemy tak oficjalnie zakończyć, tak? I zostać jeszcze przy wspólnym stole i porozmawiać jeszcze, bo naprawdę tematy, które są poruszane.
It can be an official end, but we can also stay and maybe sit at the table to speak a little bit more together, because that's true that all the subjects are very important and interesting.
Nie wiem. Może pozwolę sobie.
But well, I must say I set the whole day before the screen, and now it's late evening, and my capacity is used.
Ale ja muszę też
I
powiedzieć,
need to recharge somehow, and this is all. This is for me. This is all a new beginning of an important thing, and so why not start again at another time, or continue at another time.
Okay.
No dla mnie to już też jest bardzo długi dzień siedzenia przed komputerem, przed ekranem, więc czuję, że już tutaj możliwości się wyczerpują, ale czuję też, że jest to początek czegoś bardzo ważnego, który co warto by było kontynuować w trakcie innego seminarium.
Okej. Daniel, z całego serca dziękuję. I Werner, z całego serca dziękuję.
Thank you. Thank you.
Heartfelt thanks.
Okay. Nie wiem, czy Johnny zostaje z nami, tak?
Well, thank you all as well. I just say good night.
Dobranoc wszystkim.
Dobranoc. Yes.
Dobranoc.
Dobranoc.
Dobranoc. Bye.
Jolene, I look forward to our working together in the future.
Yes, let's do that. And I think also if there are many questions, maybe it could be the topic of the next seminar could be distilled from all these questions to create a follow-up.
Well, I think organizing is a crucial one. Organizing our voice.
Tak, czyli rzeczywiście można by takie seminarium już z tych pytań nawet nowych gdzieś tam stworzyć, tak, na bazie tych różnych treści, które się pojawiły od osób, które do nas pisały.
Też, tak jak powiedziałem, uruchomiło to cały proces myślenia tego, jak dużo trzeba zrobić jeszcze, a jak dużo zostało zrobione, ale tak naprawdę trzeba rzeczywiście cały czas lobbować i gdzieś wpukać w drzwi.
So it somehow has activated the whole process of thinking what we can do more about it, but still there's so much to do, so much left that we have to do. We have to
we have in the US actually two annual conferences which we're continuing online, and one is called Alternatives, and these are open internationally. The Alternatives Conference, we'll do that again this year. We've done 35 years now. We've done the Alternatives Conference. It's run by and primarily for people with lived experience, but also for people who want to get educated. And then we have a second one called Peer Apocalypse. That's more our West Coast. That's also run by, for people with lived experience. And so I invite people in Poland, if you, I mean, unfortunately, we won't have translation, but if you can understand some English, to come and interact with us. And secondly, I would suggest such a conference be organized for Europe, for the European Union. And we'd be glad, since we've done many of them, we'd be glad to assist you in organizing such a international conference.
W Stanach Zjednoczonych organizowane są dwie takie bardzo ważne coroczne konferencje. Jedna z nich to Alternatives, która jest już organizowana od 35 lat. Jest organizowana przez i dla ludzi z doświadczeniem kryzysu psychicznego. Również jest druga konferencja Peer Apocalypse, czyli apokalipsa ex-inów, można przetłumaczyć, która jest na zachodnim wybrzeżu. I w obu tych przypadkach jest to przeznaczone dla ludzi z doświadczeniem kryzysu. Również mogą ludzie z Polski dołączyć, oczywiście nie będzie tłumaczenia, ale jeżeli ktoś dysponuje językiem angielskim, może w ten sposób skorzystać, więc jest to zaproszenie ze strony Davida Fischera. Ale również sugeruje on, że warto zorganizować podobną konferencję na poziomie europejskim. I tutaj ze Stanów Zjednoczonych można by wtedy pozyskać pomoc w organizacji tego typu wydarzenia.
Super. No to jest kolejny cel wyznaczony, rozumiem.
That's another goal for us, which we can set.
To też może zakończymy dzisiaj rzeczywiście, bo tych pytań jest sporo.
Maybe we'll coming to an end because we have a lot of questions that came up in the meantime, but
Na pewno nasza fundacja będzie szukać środków, żeby zrobić kolejne seminarium.
For sure, our foundation will look for more funding to organize next seminar.
Żeby połączyć różne praktyki, metodyki pracy, narzędzia.
Just to have and to join many different practices, methodologies, maybe even means of work.
Od zachodniego i sieciować się od zachodniego wybrzeża Stanów Zjednoczonych po Australię.
To do networking from the West Coast to Australia.
Także z całego serca również Żoni dziękuję Ci, przepraszam za wymowę, dziękuję za uczestnictwo.
A heartful thank Jolene for your participation.
Za motywację.
For motivating us.
I wskazanie kolejnych możliwości.
And showing us few possibilities.
Chciałbym również podziękować jeszcze raz.
And I would like to thank one more time
wolontariuszom i osobom, które przygotowały to seminarium.
Volunteers and all people who prepared the seminar.
Którzy przyczynili się do tego, żeby to seminarium powstało.
And contributed to it in any form.
Wszystkim użytkownikom dzisiejszego spotkania, które uczestniczyli na Zoomie lub też na YouTube.
All the users and participants that have participated in the seminar via YouTube or here on Zoom.
Mam takie nieoparte wrażenie, że to jest dopiero początek.
And I really feel that it's just the beginning.
Chociaż się strasznie tego boję.
Even though I'm really afraid of it.
Tutaj chciałem jeszcze raz serdecznie podziękować, również podziękować Mental Health Europe.
So I would like to thank warmly Mental Health Europe organization
z finansowaniem
for
wydarzenia.
Financing this event.
portalowi Piękny Umysł za
and
usługę
the
wydarzenia.
beautiful mind portal for the service and the tool,
W Biurze do Spraw Osób Niepełnosprawnych Uniwersytetu Pedagogicznego,
and the office for disabled persons at the University of Pedagogy in Krakow.
bardzo serdecznie podziękować paniom tłumaczkom.
And thank warmly translators.
Mówię tutaj nie tylko o języku angielskim, ale też tłumaczach języka migowego.
Also sign language interpret.
Powoduje to, że jest to dostępne dla każdego.
Because it makes it accessible for everyone.
A to jest najistotniejsze.
And this is the most important.
Mamy różne języki, ale próbujemy przekazać.
Because we have different languages, but we are trying to come across it and to bridge it.
Na pewno zrobimy dedykowaną stronę do tego wydarzenia z seminarium. Będzie ono udostępnione na YouTube.
We'll develop a dedicated website about the event with YouTube
Takim przypomnieniem za każdym
recording
razem,
to remind you every time
że w najgorszym czasu pandemii zrzeszają się osoby, by tworzyć nową przyszłość.
that in the worst time of the pandemic we gather here to create better future.
Po to, żeby każdy mógł utrzymać swoje własne zdrowie psychiczne i rozwijać.
So that everybody can have access to mental health, good mental health, and build up on it.
W imieniu Fundacji Człowiek dziękuję serdecznie.
In the name of the Human-Foundation, thank you all for coming and being with us.
Bye. Dziękuję.
Okay.
It's okay. Thank you very much.
Dziękuję. Dziękuję.
Dziękuję bardzo.
Dziękuję.
Bardzo.
Bardzo dziękuję. Thank you very much.
Bardzo dziękuję.
Proszę. To bardziej ja dziękuję.